Hello, everyone, and welcome to Voter Registration and Engagement Training. My name is Chelsea Haley. I'm a former Ambrose MSW graduate, and I currently work in Illinois as a school social worker. Prior to that, I worked in a crisis center, and I was a probate paralegal for 10 years. I currently serve on the CSWE, Committee for Social Work Education, Committee on Environmental Justice. I was trained on voter engagement strategies and political activism in Washington, D.C. by a wonderful group called Friends of the Earth, and I partnered with the League of Women Voters on voter registration events around our community. I've presented to the community and organizations on topics related to mental health, environmental justice, and poverty. Before going back to school for my master's in behavior analysis, I had organized a local activism group where we hosted call-in days, petition drives, lobbying meetings. We even met with our mayor and did all sorts of other political activities each month. Which brings me to the purpose of this training. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about voting rules, registration, how that relates to special populations, 501c3 voter registration and engagement rules, and then we're going to spend the majority of our time practicing voter engagement activities, including a registration tabling event, which, as I understand it, is something you'll all be doing for your class project. If you follow along and participate in these activities, you'll finish this training with a blueprint for your project, and all you'll have to do is implement it. So again, I'm going to give you all the tools, strategies, and resources you need for your project, and then any other activism work that you'd like to do beyond that. Before we begin, please make sure you've all completed your self-assessment. Once you do that, please move on to the next slide. I have a few questions for you to check your knowledge, and since this is a recording, I'll read the question, pause briefly, and then give you the answer. Just because someone is registered to vote, it doesn't mean they will vote. New registrants typically vote at lower rates. This statement is false. Don't worry if you said true. So far in this training, everyone has said true, and I also used to think the same thing. But in fact, voter turnout among individuals between the ages of 18 and 29 has actually increased each time since 2004. Illinois doesn't require voter ID to vote. This statement is true. We're going to talk a little bit more about this in a couple slides. There's only one important date I need to know to vote, and that's November 3rd. This statement is false, and this one is particularly interesting because there are so many ways to be involved throughout the year, and when people are just beginning to exercise their right to vote, they often have no idea of the numerous opportunities they have to be involved in important decisions that affect them personally and their community. The link on this slide provides a calendar of voter events for both Iowa and Illinois. Every vote matters. This statement is true. I'm sure all of you said true. Great job. We know there are issues with the way our system is set up, and things could definitely improve, but every vote does still matter, and there have actually been several cases throughout U.S. history where we've seen every vote matter, even as far back as the 1800s. When people think that their vote doesn't matter, it creates a huge problem, a sort of logical fallacy in which millions of people don't vote. In the 2016 election, there were 62.7 million eligible voters with disabilities, or those who had household members with disabilities. And of those 62.7 million people, only 16 million voted. The voter turnout rate was 6 percentage points lower than people without disabilities. If people with disabilities had voted at the same rate as people without, that would have been an additional 2.2 million voters. Each of these questions are questions that I've been asked or arguments made by registrants at tabling events. And I've included them so you're equipped to respond when someone inevitably tells you something like, well, my vote doesn't matter, why bother? Voting matters so much, it is so important, that you can even do it from space. Now we're going to talk a little bit about voting rules. To vote in Iowa and Illinois, you must meet these requirements. You have to be a U.S. citizen, a resident of the state for at least 30 days prior to Election Day, and be at least 18 years old by Election Day. A 17-year-old may vote in a primary if he or she will be 18 years old at the subsequent general election. Illinois does not require photo ID to vote. There are many other acceptable forms of identification that one can use instead of their photo ID. And the card you see on this slide is a printable card from votewriters.org, where you can get similar cards for every state. If you're voting in Iowa, you must show photo ID, which can be a driver's license, passport, military ID, voter ID card, and a few others, as you can see on this slide. There are several different ways to register in Illinois, and depending on which option you choose, there are different deadlines. You have the same options in Iowa, however the deadlines do differ slightly, so please make note of that. There are numerous places you can register in Illinois, and it's interesting because schools are listed as one of these places. And I work in a school, and I had no idea, and neither did my coworkers. If someone had come to us before we figured this out and said they wanted to register to vote, we would have probably sent them somewhere else. We would have had no idea. This is what the voter registration form looks like for Illinois. And as you can see, there are instructions. It's pretty self-explanatory, but I would strongly recommend that you all practice filling out both the Iowa and Illinois forms. They do have to be filled out accurately and completely. And when I've registered people to vote, a lot of questions have come up as to how they're supposed to fill out the form. Some people have even put an item on the wrong line by mistake or walked away and forgotten to sign it. So being familiar with the form so that you can answer their questions will be very useful to you and will help keep things moving along and speed things up. And always make sure to check it for accuracy and a signature. Iowa residents may register in person at the Scott County Auditor's Office. And hopefully we can also add all of your internship placements to these lists too. And we'll talk about why that's important when we get to the section on 501c3s. Now we're going to talk briefly about individuals who may face unique barriers when it comes to exercising their right to vote. The first is those with a felony conviction. Most states have voting restrictions if you have a felony conviction, but many restore the right to vote after completion of a sentence, and Illinois is one of those states. The individual can't be currently incarcerated and can't be on probation or parole. They'll have to re-register to vote if they were registered prior to conviction, and they can vote under the following conditions. If they've been charged with a crime but not yet convicted, if they've been released on bail or bond, if they're in jail but not convicted, if they are under electronic monitoring, and if they've been recently arrested but not convicted. Unfortunately, in Iowa, anyone convicted of a felony permanently loses the right to vote. If you are living abroad, you can still vote. Simply request an absentee ballot by completing an overseas request, and you can find those requests at overseasvotefoundation.org, the link on this slide. There are a few ID options when completing the form. You can use your U.S. state or territory or district issued ID. There's also an option to indicate you don't have the requested ID, or you can use the last 4 digits of your social security number. Students may use their campus or home address when registering to vote. They just can't use both. And there are some common questions that students might have when registering, and you might have been wondering these things as well. Does voting in Iowa or Illinois affect federal financial aid? No. Will I lose my scholarship if I register to vote in Iowa or Illinois? No, as long as residency of a particular place isn't a requirement for that scholarship. Will it affect my driver's license or car registration? Yes, registering to vote in Iowa and Illinois makes you a resident in that state and requires transfer of the driver's license and vehicle registration. It also will not prevent parents from claiming their children as dependents on their taxes if they are students and they register in a different state. And being in-state or out-of-state for tuition purposes doesn't affect the right to vote, so they can still vote in their college community or home community regardless of their tuition status. There are laws and cases that protect individuals with disabilities when it comes to accessing their polling places. We won't watch the video included on this slide today, but I recommend you take a look at it if you have time. The Americans with Disabilities Act prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability in programs provided by the state and local government, and voting is one of those programs. So that means that all polling places must comply with the ADA accessibility standards. Counties and cities have been sued over this. Equipforequality.org is a great resource if anyone experiences discrimination based on their disability while trying to vote. You'll probably also run into individuals who don't currently have a home address, and their address can be a shelter, friend's house, food pantry, or other social services agency, as long as they can receive mail there. If registering in person, they need a letter from someone verifying they can get their mail there, and this letter can also be used as one of their two forms of ID when registering in person. This is for Illinois. For Iowa, this can be a short description of place of residence, and they can vote in a polling place close to where they spend their time during the day. And if they're a survivor of domestic violence, they obviously won't want to use their address of the shelter. They can use a Safe at Home program, and that will provide them with a substitute address to protect their confidentiality. People who identify as transgender, non-binary, or gender non-conforming unfortunately have to worry about people questioning their identity because of the name, the gender marker, or their photo on their ID. And again, in Illinois, photo ID is not required. They can show one of the other acceptable forms like a debit card, social security, utility bill, etc. If they do show their photo ID to the poll worker, the worker should not be looking at the gender marker to verify their identity. They cannot prevent them from voting just because they don't look like their picture or what the poll worker thinks they should look like based on their name and gender marker. Poll workers are wonderful for doing this very time-intensive and stressful job, but they are just people like us, and they make mistakes. And it's not unheard of for a poll worker to challenge someone on their ID, and that person leaves without voting, and we definitely don't want that. They don't have to do that. They can challenge the poll worker, they can pull up the applicable rules, or they can request a provisional ballot which will record their vote so it can be counted, can be held until they can get this issue resolved. Obviously, language can be another barrier. If someone does not speak English and needs information on voter registration or polling location, they can call the numbers on this slide for additional assistance. I'd recommend printing this out on slips of paper just so you can hand these to people when you're having your tabling event in case you come across someone who needs this. We're going to switch gears here and talk about nonprofits. I mentioned earlier on the registration location slide that it would be great to add your internships, and here's why. Nonprofits have access to a lot of potential voters, a lot more diverse voters, people who typically, for one reason or another, have low turnout rates. People often ignored by political campaigns. Nonprofitvote.org, among a few other agencies, have done studies on nonprofit voter engagement, and all show really promising results. In one study, a comparison between the nonprofit voters and typically registered voters, it was found that nonprofit voters were 15% higher turnout for Latino voters, 31% higher for Black voters, and 46% higher for Asian American voters. 31% higher for individuals whose household incomes were under $25,000, and 28% higher for young voters under the age of 30. Even simply asking people who were already registered to vote to sign a Pledge to Vote card made a huge impact. In fact, that one act resulted in more actual voters when compared to typically registered voters. A Pledge to Vote card is essentially asking voters to commit to vote. They write their name and information on the card, they sign it as their pledge to vote, and then that card can be mailed back to them close to Election Day as a final reminder of the commitment they made. There's an example of the Pledge to Vote card on this slide. If you want to have these at your table, at your voter engagement table, you can find templates online or create your own similar to this one. You can see on the slide that this simple act makes a huge difference. I know 3% doesn't sound like a lot, but as we discussed at the beginning in the knowledge check, a few percentage points, even one vote, can make a huge difference, especially when it comes to those small and local races. And if you're wondering about funds for something like this, postage to mail these cards back, your field placements will need to check with their awarded grants to make sure there are no limits on their use of funds for voter registration. Nonpartisan does not mean non-participation. There are a lot of benefits to voter engagement through your field placements. Nonprofits are deeply rooted in most local communities and have daily contact with clients. They disproportionately reach individuals who aren't often represented and are underserved. And they're typically very well trusted in the community because people know that they do not have a political agenda, they are nonpartisan. Nonprofit organizations are incredibly important to the democratic process. The U.S. Constitution, Congress, and the IRS protect the rights of nonprofits to engage in advocacy and legislative lobbying, but there are rules. They cannot appear partisan, and this means that they can't participate in political campaigns on behalf of or in opposition to any candidate. They can't contribute to, endorse, or rate candidates. They can't suggest a candidate to a voter. If someone's asking, who should I vote for, they can give them information on their options, but they cannot appear to be for or against anyone in particular. And those who are involved in the nonprofit, including staff, board members, and volunteers, cannot be partisan while representing the organization or using organizational resources for a candidate. That includes not wearing your agency t-shirt when you're at a rally. This may be interpreted as you representing your agency and them being partisan. They can register people to vote. They can also distribute materials and sponsor forums or debates as long as it's all nonpartisan. They can advocate for voting rights and election reform. They can encourage their staff and volunteers to sign up as poll workers, and they can help people get to the polls on election day and so much more. We're going to talk about some strategies that you can use today. You can use these for yourself as someone who is partisan, and then you can modify these. You can use them in your agencies just to make sure that it's nonpartisan. As you can see on the slide, there are some cans and can'ts, and in your handouts you have a much longer bullet point list of all the amazing, wonderful things that you can do in your agencies. Now for the fun stuff. We're going to talk about voter engagement and the many, many ways that you can connect with people either to get them registered and interested in voting or to build a community of activists. And we're going to practice some of these strategies so that you all get some great hands-on experience doing this, so that you leave here with your blueprint for your event. And everything that we are going to be talking about and practicing, I've actually done. So if you have any questions or you need any help, please feel free to email me, and I will help in any way I can. You all were given a link to this video. Hopefully you've had time to watch it. It is really an amazing video, and it addresses the question of, does voting matter? Why bother? Why care about it? And one thing that he does not go into, which is why we did talk about this specifically, was the barriers that potential voters face. And it's those barriers that make the matter of voting more complex than it ought to be. So he doesn't really go into that. But what really inspired me by his talk was when he was talking about building a community of voters and not being isolated in that community. So creating a culture where voting is important to us, important to all of us, and having that connection and community to help us keep engaged and interested. In the United States, voting is a right. It's not the law. In some other countries, it is the law. So we really need to do more to create a community around this. Some of you may be familiar with Marshall Gann's Story of Self, and this is our first activity, and it is the foundation of every other activity that's going to come after this. So it's really important that you participate in this and that you craft your story of self. And it doesn't have to be perfect, and it doesn't have to be absolutely complete, but you're going to be using it in everything else that we do tonight. The story of self is a way for us to connect with others and recruit them to our cause. And it has a few components. It lets people know what you care about, and it piques their interest with a compelling story about why you care, what you had to overcome to do what you're doing. and it allows them to connect with you on a personal level. You can kind of think of this as an elevator pitch. You meet someone in an elevator, and you only have about 2 minutes to tell them everything you need them to hear. In that 2 minute period, you need to motivate people to act by evoking emotion and showing your values. How do you do that in just 2 minutes? You have a handout in your folders called the Story of Self worksheet, and that gives you a lot of great information on this model. And if you'll turn to page 5, you'll find some questions that will help guide you in creating your story of self and get you thinking about what components you want to put into that. And this is important because you need a way to engage with people. And if you're like me and you don't particularly like talking to strangers, this is like a get out of jail free card. You don't have to fumble for what to say. You know exactly what to say. And not only that, what you have to say is compelling. For the purposes of your tabling event, I want you to think about an issue for which you deeply care, and I want you to frame it in terms of voter registration and engagement. So for example, my biggest passion, if I had to pick only one, is environmental justice. I think it's more important than any other issue. If we can't go outside and breathe, if we destroy our planet, then we won't really be able to fight other social justice issues. And obviously, different issues are very intersectional. We don't have to pick just one, and you aren't all going to feel the same way I do about environmental justice. You're going to have something else that is your environmental justice, and that's okay. But again, reframe it. Going back to mine, I can recycle, I can carpool to work, I can do all these things in my life that are better for the environment, but in the grand scheme of things, what's that going to do? What will be more valuable and make a bigger impact is if I'm helping to protect the laws that protect our environment. And I do that by calling my representatives and telling them to reject any budget that cuts funding to the Environmental Protection Agency. And maybe your passion is funding for food stamps. So whatever it is, think about how you want to communicate your values and the challenges that you've had to overcome to fight for the thing that you believe in. So please take 5 to 10 minutes to craft your story of self. And if it helps, I will provide mine, and you can pause it right here. You do not have to listen to it. Mine is about when I joined the MSW program. So here is my story of self. I was abused as a kid, and as I grew up, that was a source of shame, of pain. It was something that I could hardly bear to think about without falling apart. And it was affecting other areas of my life, and that made me feel really disgusted with myself, which is unfair, but that's how I felt. And I realized that I felt that way because I felt helpless, powerless, so I was stuck and I couldn't move on. Obviously, I couldn't go back in time and change what happened to me, but I could change how I continued to respond to it. I could take this awful negative thing in my life and create something positive and powerful out of it. I didn't have an advocate when I was little, no one to see what was happening to me and put a stop to it and help me. And I knew I wasn't the only one because I'd learned as a survival instinct to become very observant and analyze the people and situations around me. And as an adult, what I was seeing was that others were suffering too, and for all kinds of reasons. There are injustices all around us every day that are completely unnecessary. And that's when I decided that I was going to do something about it. I was going to find a way to put action behind the things that I was feeling. Because it's nice to sit around and talk about it and recognize that there are issues, but then what? What do we do with that information besides continue to feel bad about it? That's when I decided to join the MSW program and learn the tools and skills that I needed to change the world for myself and others. And now when I think about my past, I don't have these awful feelings, and it's not something that negatively informed my character. I feel inspired to do something, and because of that, I no longer carry around this injury. Please feel free to take a few minutes and talk about your story of self with each other. You can practice this with one another. You can talk about any challenges you faced trying to develop this, what you thought about it. Now that you know why you care and what you want to say to connect with people, we're going to talk about recruitment. Because you can't do this alone, and if you try, you're going to get discouraged and you're going to get tired, and eventually you might give up altogether. Remember, we talked about building a culture of people who care, building a community. This is how we do that. We do that through recruitment. When you're recruiting people, obviously start with who you know, other students, family, friends, other like-minded individuals. But don't stop there. Cast a wide net. And there are many different ways that you can do that. You can make phone calls, you can have tabling events, pass out flyers, use social media to create groups and invites, do it over email, or you can have house parties or meetings. You can even invite someone who is running for office or planning to run, and you can make them the guest of your house party because they also want to connect with people. But the top 4 ways of effective recruitment are phone, network, one-on-one, and online. And we'll talk more about different methods, but right now we're going to focus on getting people interested in participating. So you have your story of self, you give that. You tell them what you plan to do, the event you're putting together. Then the most important part, this recruitment piece that we're adding on to your story of self, is to make your ask. And this is a hard ask, not a passive one. You are asking for a specific commitment to a specific action, so be aware of your language. If I were to ask Dr. Augustine, I'm sorry to bother you, but would you maybe consider doing me a huge favor and think about possibly coming to my letter writing event, if you don't mind? He's not coming. I don't sound like I know what I'm talking about. I don't sound confident. I gave him an out by being so passive, and I didn't give him any useful information. Now, if I were to instead say, Dr. Augustine, can I count on you to come to my letter writing event at the library this Thursday at 3 p.m.? That's way better. I told him everything he needs to know to say yes. I didn't give him an out. It didn't sound like I didn't know what I was doing by using passive language. He's far more likely to say yes. So I'd like you all to turn to one another and take about 90 seconds and make your hard ask. Feel free to use your tabling event in March. Ask the person next to you, make your hard ask, and then switch. Feel free to take a few minutes to talk about what it was like to make a hard ask. I know that can be kind of intimidating and it can feel very awkward, but practicing it today is really going to help you in the future when you're face to face with someone that you don't know. You'll be able to do this with a lot more ease. Another item that I would like to touch on, but we're not going to practice this today, is a petition drive. A petition drive is a collection of signatures from people supporting your issue. You then present that to decision makers who have the power to make the change you're asking for. And a petition drive is what you do to get those signatures. In your handouts, you have an awesome resource from Friends of the Earth that gives you 4 simple steps to create a petition drive: the logistics, where, when, what time you'll have the drive, recruitment, how to get people to join you in planning and executing the drive, what materials you'll need, and how to get the word out to others. You also have a sample of exactly what you can say. So as you can see, this does incorporate your story of self and your hard ask. So feel free to review these resources at your convenience. If a petition drive is something you would like to do in the near future and you'd like some help or guidance, please feel free to reach out to me. Another useful strategy that we won't necessarily practice, but I want to touch on, is calling. Everybody's busy, and maybe petition drives are too time consuming or too intimidating. Calling our representatives is extremely useful, simple, and important. It is so easy to do. Your call does not have to take more than a minute. You can incorporate your story of self. You can abbreviate that to just about a minute and use that in your call. And it's important because every time you call your rep's office, their staff have to log those calls, and those numbers are given to our representatives. If they get a ton of calls from their constituents on a particular issue, that sends a big signal to them that this is something that we all care about. And this is a quick call, and it incorporates those strategies that we've discussed, the story of self and that hard ask. There's an issue that's important to you. You call your rep, you tell them your name, zip code, and that you are a voting constituent of that senator. Express the importance of that issue to you. That's your story of self. And then ask the senator to prioritize that issue, to oppose or support it. That's your hard ask. And remember, when you make a call, you'll be speaking directly to a staff person, so be concise so that they can tally your opinion correctly. Be respectful. The staff person taking your call isn't there to challenge your position or argue. They're just there to take your call and make a record of why you're calling. So on the next slide, there are two really awesome links that will give you all the information you need to make a call. It will help you find an issue if you do not have an issue currently that you want to call about. And it will even give you a script. You don't have to make up your own thing at all. You can just use a script. So you don't have to do that today, but if you would like to, that would be amazing. So feel free to take a minute for your call. Another really interesting strategy that we can use is letters to the editor, or LREs. An LRE is a letter sent to a paper about an issue of concern from its readers. And this is another simple strategy, and some people might not find it quite as intimidating as a petition drive or even making a phone call. And with a little guidance, it's very, very easy to do. So there are a few things that you need to know about why LREs are important. They have a large reach. A lot of people, despite what we might think, still read the paper, including and especially our elected officials. They are monitoring these opinion letter sections to see what their constituents are saying about them. It can also be used to highlight important information that might not otherwise appear in the paper, and it's your way of getting coverage for something that they're not covering. And also, very important, LREs create the impression of widespread support for or opposition to an issue. The LRE that I did, which you have an example of in your handout, including some resources on how you can draft your own LRE and everything you need to know to create one. I actually did this, and someone I hadn't spoken to in a couple of years who is living in Arizona but must have still gotten our local paper sent me a picture of my letter to the editor. So it does have really, really wide reach. It's really kind of awesome. We're not going to practice lobbying today, but I do want to talk briefly about it and also point out some amazing resources in your folders from Friends of the Earth that give you step-by-step instructions, scripts, everything you need to know about lobbying. I also have a sample agenda from when my group lobbied with Ernst's office, which is what this picture is from. So lobbying is important for many reasons. It helps you build a relationship with your elected official, which is very important. And it's one of the most powerful ways that you can let them know what you want them to do, that you want them to vote a certain way. You want them to take a specific stand on an issue, and it's your opportunity to persuade them by letting them know what the issue is, why you care, and what's at stake. So again, you're incorporating your story of self in your hard ask. So think about this. You and someone else care deeply about an issue, but you're divided. You have different perspectives. How do you think the representative is going to view the issue if your opponent is the only person to get a group of people together and visit the rep, talk to them about why it's important? We talked a little bit about apathy earlier. I think at some point we all become so disillusioned with the entire political process that we forget that we, the constituents, hold a great deal of influence over our elected officials. It's their job to listen to us, to meet with us, to speak with us, and to represent our interests. If you only take away one thing from today, that's what I hope you'll remember. So a few tips on lobbying. Schedule a meeting ahead of time with the rep staff person. As always, be polite and professional. Come with an agenda planned out so you don't get off track. Use your story of self. That should be the first thing you do after introductions. Tell them about the issue. Give them resources and articles if you have them, but don't rely on them to read it. Give a brief summary of what you're giving to them. Highlight the important key pieces, and then make your hard ask. And it's okay if they evade your question. Feel free to make your hard ask again. Be bold and assertive. And then thank them for their time. And take pictures. Ask them if they'll take a photo with you. And if they did answer your hard ask, and if they are in support of your issue, ask them if you can take a photo together and post it on your social media saying Senator so-and-so agreed to fight, this issue. And make sure everyone knows that you let that rep know about this important issue and that you ask them for their support or opposition. Okay, this is our last activity, and this is going to be the bulk of everything, and I'm going to give you step-by-step instructions on how to do a tabling event. So this will help you in March, or if you want to set up a separate event at your agency, feel free to do that. I actually found that of all the strategies that we discussed today, this is the easiest to pull off. A voter registration event is simply you and your group, the people you recruited, with a table at a community event, registering people to vote, giving them information, and trying to recruit them if you want. What I've found in the Quad Cities is that we have so many different activism groups in existence, operating, doing things right now. They're all very, very active. They're all putting together events almost every week. And what my group did was we connected with those groups and other community organizations. So think of your field placements here. We asked if we could have a table to register people to vote at their next event. And this is so easy because agencies love nothing more than for someone to come in and offer to provide a free service to their attendees. The picture that you see here is me at a tabling event that I joined. It was for a block party that a local church was having, and there were other vendors. There were even foods. It was a barbecue, and we actually registered a good number of voters and did a good number of absentee ballots. And all I had to do was ask if I could come, and then just make sure I had all my supplies and materials. I didn't have to reinvent the wheel. I didn't have to put together my own event. So really lean on that resource whenever you can. This is also a really great way for you to network with other groups and pool your resources and recruit with one another. So a few tips that helped me: again, use existing resources, get yourself added to upcoming events. Feel free to organize your own event as well, which is also really wonderful. Make sure you have enough supplies and materials, voter registration forms, signs so that people know what your table is. And this may seem silly, but it does really, really help. Have snacks or candy. That's gonna get people to come over, and then you hit them with your story of self. You make your heart ask. You ask them if they'll register, or if they'll fill out an absentee ballot, or if they'll do a pledge to vote card. Make people want to stop by and then engage with them. And then finally, follow up. Send a thank you note to the agency organizing the event for letting you have a table there, and then keep that person as a contact. They'll likely let you come back to their next event. And then obviously this goes without saying, you're all in a master's level program, but be professional, dress nicely, be polite, all that good stuff. Now I'm going to give you step-by-step instructions for creating your voter registration tabling event. And Dr. Augustine might have you use this for your March event, or he might ask you to select another event. So if you are selecting another event, please take out your computers, get online, look at different agencies, look at their calendars, figure out what they have coming up that you could ask for a table, and talk to each other too. You're all placed somewhere. You might have something coming up soon, and you might be able to help each other out that way. So if you're going to look for a different event that is not the March event on campus, please pause this before I start with the steps. Step 1, pick your place, time, and date of event. Think here about having a captive audience. So where are people going to already be? Think about high traffic and busy areas. And feel free to be creative and think outside of the box. So this could be a farmer's market. You could have a table there. Or you could set up outside of a bar. You could set up outside of a venue. People love nothing more than a way to pass the time while waiting in line for something. Step 2. Please write this down. Talk to the right people. So if you're doing an already established event, obviously you would talk to the event organizer and ask them if you could have a table there. If you were going to set up outside of a venue, it is the venue, not the band, that makes a decision on who can have a table there. And then you might also consider going to a high school and registering seniors, so you would contact school administrators. And the only thing I would caution about that, if you are in Iowa, I believe Roxana, she did at one point, and I'm sure she still does, she has something already set up with the high schools, so you might need her permission to do that because she has an agreement with them already. If you are in Illinois, I don't believe there's anything for that existing, and I'm sure that they would be more than happy to invite you into their school to have a table around lunchtime or another busy time to register students. Step 3, build your team. So when you're building your team, think about the size of the event itself. Is this something that's going to occur over the course of a couple days? Is it a weekend event? Is it a whole day event? Is it just a couple of hours? So how many people do you need? I would recommend at a minimum 3, 4 if you can get them. The more people you have, the easier it is to work the room, canvas the line, and plus it's fun to do it with friends. So ask people to help out, tell them what you're doing and why it's important. That's your story of self, that's your hard ask. And then once you have selected your event and you know what you're doing, get online and post it on social media, tweet about it. Register it on sites like Action Network and Rock the Vote. What's awesome about these websites is that they will promote your event and help you recruit more volunteers. So if you go to these websites, you can look for local events and then you can sign up to participate in them. And then give each of your volunteers a job. Not everyone is going to have the same strengths or want to do the same things. And part of when you are recruiting for an event, it's important to make sure that you are giving people something that they feel good about and that they can do. One person may really, really hate the idea of standing behind a table and talking to people and helping them fill out forms, and that is absolutely okay. Maybe that person would be happy getting all the supplies together or making copies, or maybe they want to be the one that runs the filled out forms to wherever they need to go or puts them in the mail. So be creative with your volunteers, focus on their strengths and give them different opportunities to be involved with you, things that might be a little bit less intimidating for them. Step 4, get your supplies and materials like your voter registration forms, other papers, clipboards, pens, different things that you will need to complete these forms. So how do you get them? You can download them from the Secretary of State, so Iowa or Illinois, or the auditor's website, or you can ask Roxana for forms. She has pads of voter registration forms, and if she knows that you're going to be out there registering people, I'm sure she'd be more than happy to share those with you if you do not have a way to print. So then what? Again, if you have that person who hates to be around a lot of people, have them be the one to turn the forms in. If you're in Iowa, I would take them directly to Roxana's office. I would hand deliver them because things do get lost in the mail. You can also mail them to the local Board of Elections or County Register or Secretary of State. And then make sure that you are turning the forms in as quickly as possible as soon as those forms are being filled out. We talked about the deadline, so make sure that you're getting the forms there within 24 to 48 hours or in the mail by the next day if possible. And then again, double check the forms for accuracy. Some people forget to fill something in, they put it in the wrong place, they forget to sign the form because they're talking to you. So make sure that they've filled it out completely. Otherwise, they'll have to be contacted and the auditor will have to get a new form out to them. And now that you know the rules and regulations and different rules as they apply to specific populations, if people have questions like, do I use my campus address or home address, you can answer that. So that should relieve some of that anxiety about, the unknown, what people might ask and whether or not you can help them. Step 5, other supplies. Forms, clipboards, pens, envelopes, or a box for your completed forms, a table. You can ask the event organizer if they have a table you can use. If they have chairs, some will provide that. And then make posters and banners and register to vote here signs. If you want, you can do stickers, buttons, snacks. Again, if you have someone who doesn't like that face-to-face engagement as much, maybe they can make the signs for you or get the snacks. Step 6, publicize the event. Again, go to social media, those registration sites, Action Network and Rock the Vote. Let people know that when they come to this event, they can come by your table and they can register to vote, or they can fill out an absentee ballot, or both. Also, reach out to the newspapers. If you're doing this for the March event, you'll want to talk to Ambrose first. They have a specific way that they do that, or your placements, but papers do report on that stuff, and they love to do interviews with you and talk about what you're doing, and it's just a nice way for other people to find out. Step 7, train your volunteers. You now know how to register people, you know the rules, and now your volunteers need to know the people that you recruited. So you can do this one of two ways. You can meet as a team a few days prior to the event, and you can train them, or you can meet a little early at the event before it starts. Just make sure you give yourself plenty of time. So tell them the tactics of registering voters. That'll help foster a team atmosphere. Set goals for your event. We want to register this many people today. We want to engage with this many people, and then hold each other accountable. So do introductions with your volunteers, your other recruits. Do an icebreaker if you want. Just get everyone feeling comfortable and excited because they might be a little bit intimidated or uncertain. Give them the materials they need, like the clipboards and forms, and walk them through how to fill out the form. Let them know common mistakes people make, what they need to be looking out for, like someone forgetting to sign it or filling something out the wrong way. And they should be asking people when they come to the table or when they approach them in other lines, if they are registered to vote at their current address. If they say yes, ask them if they would like to fill out an absentee ballot. If they say no, ask them if they'd like to do a pledge to vote card. If they don't want anything to do with you, offer them a snack and thank them for stopping by, and then move it along, move on to someone else. If they do fill something out, let them know what you're going to do with that. Let them know that you're going to send them their pledge to vote card shortly before election, or you are going to deliver their forms to the auditor within 48 hours and they'll get their voter card in the mail within 4 to 6 weeks. And let them know where they can get more information if they have questions. So you have links on this PowerPoint, and at the end of the presentation you have a lot of other resources, links for those, as well as handouts and a Google Drive folder with tons of amazing resources. And then practice this, role play this with your volunteers to get them warmed up. So just a few more tips. The day of, confirm the logistics with the event host. Check in with them to let them know that you're there and prepared. Call your volunteers to confirm their attendance and make sure you have all the supplies. Get there at least an hour before it starts to get your table set up, and make sure you have time to get what you need if something was overlooked or forgotten. And have your volunteers come in 30 minutes beforehand. Train them if you didn't do that already, or give them a recap if you did. And I say check in with them, call them to make sure that they are going to attend, because sometimes people will drop off and it's very easy to ignore a text. So if you're calling them, that might be a better way to get them there. Also remember that voter registration forms are precious, so take them seriously, treat them with respect, make sure they're filled out correctly, get them where they need to go as soon as possible. And when you're at the event, don't stand behind the table the whole time. It's very easy to do it. I am guilty of doing that. Make sure you're moving around, you're being friendly. People are seeing you around a lot and you look like you're having fun so that you're more approachable to them. Have 2 clipboards with you, so while you are engaging with one person, they're filling out the form, you can begin to engage with another person. And then don't waste time. If someone doesn't seem like they're into it, thank them and then move on to someone you can register. As a group leader, circulate, check with your volunteers throughout the event, and also make sure that they see you registering people, that they see you working hard, because if other people in your group see you slacking off, they will too. Collect and count the forms after the event. I suggest using an Excel spreadsheet to keep track of how many registrants or absentee ballots or pledge cards you do. And then afterwards, celebrate with your group. Tell them what an awesome job that you did. And then thank everyone. And if you have another event planned, announce it and sign them up to help with that too. And then celebrate your success together. Follow up on your social media posts and events. let people know what a success it was, and then give people a link for online registration so they can register if they missed the event, or tell them where your next tabling event is, where they can find you to register. And finally, I would just like to invite you all to think about how you might apply some of these strategies into your field agencies. I know before I left mine, we were just beginning to set up a voter registration process with our intake forms, and the person in charge was very excited and interested in this. And any reservations that your agencies have, in your handouts, you now have some really useful information that you can share with them about what they can and can't do, what those rules are, and why it's important, and why it's really good for their agency and the individuals that they serve. Thank you all so much for listening to this presentation. Please fill out the second part of your self-assessment where it says after, and then leave those on the table.